Okay, so let's start. Probably people will join later, or I don't know what happens, but anyway, good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to the webinar of the Center for Migration Studies at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, in Poland. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Morgan Lance, who will present some selected results of his doctoral dissertation. The talk is entitled Understanding Migrants' Reception in France, Spain and Denmark Between Societal Structuring and Political Work of Association. The webinar is organized in cooperation with the Committee on Migration Research, Polish Academy of Science. Dr. Morgan Lance is a researcher in the Collaborative Institute on Migration in France, and he received PhD in sociology from the University in Bordeaux, Centre Émile Durkheim, in 2022. So the first part of the meeting will be the presentation, and it will be recorded. The second part, when we will have time for questions and answers, will not be recorded. So please, you may write your questions and comments in the chat, or you can raise your hand later on, and I will moderate the discussion. My name is Isabella May. What else? This recording will be available on YouTube channel, and you can also find other recordings of our previous webinars. So you are most welcome to have a look and to listen, to watch, to learn. So without further ado, I would like to welcome again Morgan. Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours, and please share your presentation. And as we agreed, you would speak more or less for 1 hour, and then we will have more space. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here today and would like to thank Jacek and Isabella to inviting me to this webinar. So is it okay for you you see the presentation? Yes? Okay. So this research analysis, this research analyzed the migrant reception logic and mechanism in France, Spain, and Denmark. And this the thesis I made deals in particular with the migration policy of these countries and the state reception and integration logic, but its originality lies to the importance I give to the role of civil society and migrant aid association into the analysis. This entrance allow me to see nuanced understanding of the complexity and conflicts that may arise within these different territories in terms of integration conception, and show the societal coherences that shape these approaches. Thus, the aim of my research is not only to understand the configuration of factors and the symbolic relationship at play, but also to explain them. What appear to be legitimate in the way in which population from non-European countries are received and integrated in Europe, in the name of what values and principles, and how integration modality deployed in practice at the associative level, and how the national citizens position themselves in relation to them. To address this question, I focused on 3 European countries, France, Spain, and Denmark. These countries are quite different from a geographical, historical, and demographic point of view, but also from an institutional point of view, which make the comparison interesting. France, Spain, and Denmark are countries that are more or less far from Europeans' border. As you know, Spain is situated at the entrance of Europe. France is more or less at the, you can say, the middle, and Denmark is longer away from this border. But with regard to demographic characteristic, these 3 countries exhibit a similar proportion of migrants and non-European resident foreigners at the time of the survey, amounting to approximately 5% of the total population. Furthermore, the proportion of migrant population, regardless of nationality, was really similar. So despite disparate total population, this country appeared to be relatively similar in terms of their migratory demographic. To ensure greater comparability and test the hypothesis of a local turn in reception policy, I select 3 cities that are similar from a demographic, institutional, and political point of view. Bordeaux, Bilbao, and Aarhus are medium-sized cities with approximately 300,000 inhabitants and with a metropolitan area of around 1 million inhabitants. They are also port city and regional capital governed by political parties at the center-left and center-right of the political spectrum, and do not are governed by far-right politics or far-left politics. Furthermore, these 3 cities have a similar proportion of immigrants population, which is representative of national average and of the main foreign nationality in the country. In each country, I spent several months and carry out ethnographic survey within 3 historical associations per term and conduct 130 interviews with their members. In order to give me the possibility to grasp independent way to think about integration, these associations were not wholly dependent on the authorities or attached to the state, nor confined to supporting the primary needs of new migrants. To evaluate the influence of national, local, or organizational frame at the city level, I also choose to analyze 3 different types of association in each city. An association with a militant or political orientation, which, for example, defend a social struggle and societal transformation approaches, an association with a religious heritage, at least from an historical point of view, and an association that benefits from substantial public funding and which claim to be apolitical. This methodology enabled me to see whether the state's local or associative approach fits together in the city. Finally, this observation has enabled me to highlight the main factor that influence the way in which national or local society think about foreigners. The presentation will be structured in 2 stages. Initially, the main approaches to integration by country will be present. Based on statistical data and migration policy analysis, I will first do that at the national level. Subsequently, I will focus at the local and community level based on the practice and discourse of grassroots organization. I will then show that the logic of integration between these levels are relatively similar. In the second part of the presentation, I will elucidate them by returning to the weight of migratory and colonial history, as well as the national model of citizenship of country. Moreover, I will integrate factors that are not directly linked to migration policies in order to explain this asymmetric construction of integration logic, such as the configuration of social system, the degrees of decentralization, or the relationship that citizens have with the state. So let's first examine what major international statistics survey, mainly Eurobarometers and World Value Survey, can tell us about the relationship between French, Spanish, and Danish citizens. Firstly, it's evident that there is a significant disparity at this level. The result of the Eurobarometer indicates, for example, that in 2022, the Spanish population surveyed has a more positive attitude toward non-European population than the citizens of France and Denmark. As illustrated in the table, 58% of Spaniards surveyed consider non-European immigration to be a positive factor for their country, in comparison to only a third of French and Danish citizens. When utilitarian criteria are considered, it becomes evident that the Spanish population is once again the most positive about the contribution of immigration to their country's development. For instance, only 2.1% of the Spanish population survey consider immigration to be a significant negative factor compared to 8.6% of the French population survey. Conversely, almost 50% of the Spanish population survey consider that immigration has a positive impact on the country development in comparison to only a quarter of the French and Danish population. However, the second graph illustrates that the Danish population is more welcoming than French when we speak about contribution. This can be attributed to the significant proportion of European labor immigrants in Denmark and an utilitarian way of thinking about migrants, whereas in France, the image of foreigner is strongly influenced by post-colonial perception and the influx of individuals from non-European countries coming mainly in reason of family reunification. Another indicator that illuminates the relationship between this national society and foreigner is the position of the far right in the political arena. It is notable that the influence of the far right has been more pronounced in France and Denmark than in Spain. In Denmark, the influence of the Danish People's Party has been particularly pronounced since 2000. In 2015, this far-right party became the second largest party in Denmark and the largest party on the right of the spectrum. In France, the score of the Front National, now Rassemblement National, has been rising since the 90s. By contrast, since the end of the Franco dictatorship, the far right has had during a long time no official party in Spain. However, the creation of the Vox party in 2013 changed at all. In 2022 election, the Spanish far right won 15% of the seat in the national parliament, while at the same time period, Danish far right collapsed. But in the Danish case, this decline is not to the decline of the far right discourses. Indeed, the nationalist and anti-immigration rhetoric of the Danish far right party is now used by all the influential party in the country, which mechanically reduce the electoral vote for the nationalist party. For instance, Social Democrats recently wins Danish national election with a clearly anti-immigration discourses. To gain insight into the relationship between French, Spanish and Danish government and foreigner, it is also possible to examine the type of residence visa grant. This allows an assessment of whether the visa favor economic, family or humanitarian form of migration. In this respect, it can be said that Spain issues a greater proportion of visa for economic reasons than Denmark, and especially than France. In France, visa issued for family reunification are overrepresented, as in the case of Spain, mainly due to the colonial history. In contrast, the rate of visa issued for family reunification in Denmark is by comparison low. Conversely, Denmark is the country that grants the most visa and humanitarian ground, and also grants the most positive decision on asylum application per million of inhabitants just after the refugee crisis, much more than the two other countries. In general, French visas are then granted for family or student reason and very limited to according to economic reason. Spanish visa are granted for a combination of economic and family reason, while in Denmark visa are for humanitarian and economic reason. This last observation is not really surprising in the case of Denmark, even if as we see before, Danish population are really opposed to migrants. In fact, we know that as we can see, Danes appear to be at the same time the most welcoming from refugee population in Europe, just behind Sweden. And that can be explained also by a social protection system, but I will speak about that before. Another indicator could be the naturalization rate. As we can see, France has the highest naturalization rates, while Denmark has the lowest and most restrictive rates. The conditions for naturalization in Denmark are also very strict, requiring individuals to have resident in the country for a minimum of 9 years, but in reality is much more, to have been financially independent for the main period of residence, to have a great economy resource, to demonstrate stronger attachment to Denmark to other country, and to pass also a very difficult linguistic and cultural tests between other restrictive conditions. Also, in this country, dual nationality, for example, was only introduced in 2015, what shows an important closeness tradition of naturalization. France appears to be the softer country on this topic. This country has a long tradition of dual nationality, and naturalization is regarded as an integral part of integration process. In France, for example, the minimum period of residence imposed before being entitled to apply to naturalization is only 5 years. In Spain, this period is 10 years. But for the Danish case, it must be noted that despite apparent restrictive conditions, the naturalization rate, as you can see on the top of this table, rate in this country is comparable to France. This can be explained because in Spain, people coming from formerly colonized country by Spanish Empire can easily obtain Spanish nationality. For them, the state only requires 2 years of residence as opposed to 10 years for other nationality, and they constitute the majority of the foreigner in the total population. This country is then both the most restrictive and the most liberal in this regard. French do not make this difference between foreign population according to the colonial history. To conclude the analysis of state and national logic of integration, it is also important to consider differences in integration policies between these countries. French integration policies are based on a highly centralized approach. For instance, new arrivals are required to sign a reception and integration contract with the Republic and attend 2 or 3 days of civic education classes designed by the state. The Spanish government has adopted a more pragmatic and decentralized approach to integration, allowing local authorities autonomy in the way of determining integration modalities. In collaboration with numerous stakeholders, states produce national framework plan, but regions make in parallel their own integration plan and evaluate themselves the integration effort of foreigners to lead to resident permit, for example. Official responsibility for integration is thus mainly given to the region, the municipalities, and civil society. Furthermore, there is a specific empadronamiento process that enables individuals to become officially integrated with municipality and to have access to some social protection system, and to be recognized as a resident without necessarily having to enter into an agreement with the states. In Denmark, the responsibility for integration policies also lies with the municipalities. However, this does not lead to a truly local integration policies. Indeed, municipalities are framed on their ability to integrate according to state criteria. For example, implemental rates of migrants, local success to national cultural test of migrants, etc. Indeed, this assessment influences the financial allocation municipality receive in order to integrate their migrants. This benchmarking process participates of the imposition of national framework at the local level. Globally, Denmark is the country with the most restrictive integration policies, even on the European scale. Non-European foreigners are not required to attend a few days of training like in France, but rather months or even years of Danish language teaching and Danish way of life courses. Based on these 3 different national indicators, I can conclude that Denmark is the country with the most restrictive integration policy and with the strongest integration measure. In contrast, Spain appears to be the most welcoming country. We've developed a local integration approach based on pragmatic integration strategies, rather than state-based as in France, with signing a contract with Republic, or nationalist approach as in Denmark. France is in an intermediary position with a tendency to be relatively open by constraint to immigration linked to long-standing migratory chains, but reticent about new immigrants, for humanitarian or economical reasons. Let's now consider the approaches of associative member I met. What they consider to be the most important aspect of integration. That was one of the questions I gave to them. And during my survey, I observed that the majority of the respondents indicate from them integration is directly linked to equality, participation, and autonomy of migrant people. These three elements appear to be a shared comprehensive understanding of integration at the associative level, and that's independently of the city of Aarhus, Bordeaux, or Bilbao. Nevertheless, the way in which these principles are prioritized and the repertory of action mobilized by association in each city were similar. In this way, I can say that socially roots way of thinking about reception and integration of foreigners were present. In Bordeaux, the association I met primarily focused on legislative initiative and language courses. Association supports foreign migrants, foreign citizens facing legal difficulty and facing the administrative machinery of the French state. They defend the application of law, with the states often lead to deny. They also organize events that promote interculturality, but they did not necessarily highlight the different ethnocultural community in the local area. This defense of local interculturality was thus coupled with an individualistic and egalitarian approach. Also, French associations were opposed to the state assimilationist philosophy of integration, and they often produced critical analysis of migration policies. They prefer to emphasize on individual autonomy and equality without necessarily dwelling on the cultural or economical participation aspects of integration. In this sense, the approach can be described as civic-pluralist. For example, one of the presidents of the political association believed that the most important thing is the second citation. For example, the president of the political association believed that the most important thing for foreigner is to have a resident permit, without which one is effectively at the mercy of police check and so on. The key issue is then for them to defend ideals that the state finally no longer uphold. Conversely, this individual posits that the role of association is not to facilitate the cultural or other form of integration of migrants. Instead, association should be provided with the tools to be free and independent in their life. One of the directors of an association says also that France, for example, had admirable ideals, but that they were not being implemented on the ground. But as evidenced by numerous interviews, this individual is also opposed to Anglo-Saxon conception. For associative member, association must then defend a kind of republican ideal, individualistic and egalitarian, which the state is undermining through its politics and rhetoric. This involves developing logic linked with general principle and the reality on the ground. In Bilbao, association opts for a more broader and comprehensive conception of integration. One can say that associations appear like social center. They work with foreigner taking them as entirely person, adopting them a multidimensional approach to integration in their activities, which encompasses legal, social, economic, psychological, and also cultural aspects of integration. In addition, they place a great deal on the issue of participation, in particular by seeking to build bridges at the urban level between host society and foreign population. This association were thus involved in popular education, sometimes directly in the street of the city. And they are organizing more playful and recreational activity that enable foreigner to meet local society, but also local society to meet foreigner, in order to alter the manner in which foreigners were perceived by national with the host society. Furthermore, the association in Bilbao almost systematically engaged in an explicit socio-economic criticism of the system that generates exclusion and produces forced migration, as the exploitation of the country of the north by the country of the south, or the role of the capitalist economy in this exploitation. So association organize, as I say, relational but also professional workshop which appear in the alignment with a national logic that welcome economic migration. Additionally, they conduct significant reflection on the reason of migration. As evidenced by the recent example of citation, the president of an associative company both denounce both capitalism and defend the concept of freedom of movement. In all my interview, members of association also often point out that they had the duty to welcome foreign and migrants, as a Spaniard and Basque has been welcomed in other countries during the history, particularly during the period of Franco dictatorship. Basically, they seem to feel a sort of debt when it came to welcoming foreigners, and to understand that they understand by the body migratory experience because of experience of exile of Basque and Spanish society. In Aarhus, association focus more on linguistic, economic, and cultural dimension of integration. In other words, their aim was to train new Danes or to speed up inclusion in the labor market. The idea from an associative perspective was to improve people's experience and support their integration by educating them about the cultural characteristics of Danish society, focusing on language learning and trying to facilitate their economic integration through intensive courses. Members of association then perceived the understanding of Danish society as a pivotal aspect of integration process. Concurrently, they made minimal effort to safeguard the right of foreigner, in stark contrast to the approach taken by association in France and in Spain. Indeed, I was unable to identify any militant or political association linked to migration topic in Aarhus. Instead, the association appeared to act as intermediaries between migrants and Danish society, facilitating accommodating approach to the state's restrictive immigration policies. Consequently, association focus was on promoting autonomy and participation from foreign people rather than advocating for equality with Danish national. Indeed, for their integration, it was almost seen as necessary that they should first be trained to act and to think like Danes. Also, Denmark is one of the European countries that speak the best English, and despite many refugees coming to Denmark speak it, Danish association considered that learning their language was essential. They also consider very important to understand the way in which Danes do think and migrants do accept Danish tradition. This nationalist approach, which nevertheless remained benevolent at the associative level, were sometimes infantilizing approach to the migrant, as the third quotation can show. Here we can see a teacher that's saying for explaining quickly how she do with the migrant, and she concludes with, here it's more like having a little baby. We taking things one step at a time. we will. I never heard this kind of perception of migrants like at the associative level in the two other cities, but it was something like coming really often, like in the Danish context. Now I will confine to three groups of factors that are decisive in the way in which the relationship with foreigner is constructed in these three societies. As the literature has long shown, it can be said that colonial and migratory history, as well as state conception, philosophies, citizenship, and integration, play a decisive role in the way in which integration is conceived by the member of society. Other factors not necessarily linked to migration or citizenship issue has also a strong effect on this conception, as the material and symbolic effect of the configuration of social protection system and the effect also of the degree of decentralization of different societies. Furthermore, the role of civic and political culture, and in particular the relationship that citizens have with their states, also seem to be a determining factor in shaping societal dynamic of integration and definitional struggle stirring indeed, notably between the association and the state. France was the second largest colonial empire until the middle of the 20th century, and has undergone relatively violent and recent processes of decolonization, particularly in North and West Africa, and in Algeria, it was the colonization until 1962 with a very violent decolonization. It's also a country that knows labor immigration since the end of the 19th century. In 1930, almost 7% of the population was already foreigners. And so the history of immigration is thus an integral part of this country and its demographic, but it's also linked to a traumatic event and conflict. This history has produced images that make the relationship between French and foreigner relatively ambivalent. Furthermore, this history helps us to understand the current migratory structure as well as the issuing for family reason, for example. As you can say, for example, Algerian, Moroccan, and Portuguese that were one of the main foreign nationality in France still are the main representative of foreigners in France. And today, nearly a third of the immigrant population was of North African origin, and also a third of French population have a descendant of migrants. The Spanish Empire began to decline in the early 19th century. Spanish society rapidly became a society of emigration and exile, fleeing dictatorship and economic misery. Spain underwent a significant migratory transition from the 80s onward, and becoming in 2004 the second most welcoming country in the world in terms of immigrants, just behind the United States. In response to this massive arrival, Spaniards appeared to engage in form of compassion, as if they were sharing the experience of the new arrival through the transmission of national or family history of migration and history of Spanish exit. The history of Spanish immigration appeared to have an impact on the capacity to understand others and to be aware about the factors that contribute to forced migration, whether for political or economical reason. And we also can see that the main foreign nationality coming from South America and from Central America that are ex-colonial countries. And also Morocco was also a Spanish colony in part. So the Danish Migration history is also long-standing, but for a considerable period, it involved populations that were culturally close, including Germans, Swedes, and Norwegians. In contrast, the Danes are not people who experience migration. Moreover, without a strong colonial empire, this country has not disseminated its language to other countries. In this context, the arrival of non-European migrants from 80s rapidly became a national issue, particularly given the absence of a shared history, language, institution between new migrants and Danish society. The situation led the state and association to prioritize the cultural and linguistic aspects of integration, and the state to adopt restrictive measures to deepen its national model of social cohesion. As we can see with this history, like in Denmark, we're facing with a really diverse humanitarian migration structure, with not a very strong community, foreign community in the country. So here, as this graph illustrates, in the long term, a significant number of foreign nationals have been resident in France since 1920. And immigration has been a long-standing and gradual process into French society, in contrast to Spain and Denmark, where more radical migratory transitions have occurred, with non-European immigration figure increasing significantly from the 1900s. Moreover, it is essential to cross this factor with the national citizenship model in order to understand the way of thinking integration and migration policies in these three countries. French states exemplify the civic territorial model of citizenship and defend the assimilationist model of integration, which emphasizes on the adherence to norm and value, but also on the rights of people. The French model of citizenship have long been contrasted with ethno-cultural model, particularly by Brubaker, in contrast with the German case. But his ethno-cultural model reflects also the logic of Danish national citizenship, with it based on the idea of a common history, ancestral tradition, homogeneity of people, and so on. Moreover, Danish society is the ideal type of nation state, insofar as the question of the link between society, state, and nation is very strong in this country. Also, Danish society is unified by its states, which is regarded as an indispensable element in maintaining national cohesion. That's not the case in the case of Spain, for example. Danish society has also been constructed upon the foundation of a culturally and religiously homogeneous population. This has resulted in a notable emphasis on equality between its citizens in this little country. In parallel, the welfare state is not merely a system of social protection. It is also for Danes a marker of identity that links contemporary national society to its past and future. In this context, the significant influx of non-European population and the ethno-cultural diversity that emerged with that pose a challenge to this long-standing societal structure. It has been perceived as a threat to national cohesion and to the national tradition preservation. Spain, in contrast, has been constructed upon a multitude of imaginary of national belonging, coming from the idea prone by the Republic, from the idea prone by the centralist dictatorship of the fascist regime of Franco, and also the idea coming from the peripheral nationalism, for example, like Galician nationalism, Catalan nationalism, but also Basque nationalism. And finally, in this country, this free approach shapes Spanish imaginaries. Moreover, Spain is in fact a nation of nations and a non-constitutional federation that places great importance on regional communities, which themselves have their own institutional identities. In this structural context, Bilbao is a part of the autonomous Basque community. And it was interesting to observe that local public and community players were thus considering integration within this framework. Given this national history and the recognition of Spanish ethnocultural diversity, integration stakeholders reject assimilationism and favor an interculturalist and pragmatic conception of integration. This statistic can reinforce what I said before. France and Denmark appear to be the two countries where the proportion of people who say are very proud of their country is highest. In contrast, Spain has the highest proportion of respondents who are not proud of their country, and also like with approximately 14% of respondents compared with 6 to 7% in the Danish and French cases. In order to understand national approach to integration, which exerts an influence on civil society through a multitude of socialization and experience-based mechanisms, it is essential to connect these disparate elements: model of citizenship, philosophy of integration, relation with cultural diversity, and legacy of migratory and colonial history. So, in addition to this factor, I demonstrate in my thesis that the configuration of the social protection system and the degree of decentralization of society are also very decisive in the way migrants' integration is conceived. So these elements have structural and symbolic effects, shaping the configuration of factors and their legitimate relationship. Social protection system impact, for example, function and position of association, and the degree of decentralization impact the proximity of negotiation and then conflict that may arise between association and public authority in the domain of integration. Therefore, these elements have not important effect on the way of construct and determining modalities of integration. These elements also have a symbolic and institutional effect relating to socialization, transmission, and legitimacy according to certain values more than others. In this sense, they influence notably the logic of attachment and solidarity between individual and the community. For instance, the degrees of decentralization affect also the scales in which the integration of new arrival will be imagined by the person at the ground level, and how it is concretely implemented. Does integration will be implemented on the Republic, like in French? Does it will integrate in the nation or more in an autonomous community? So France has a Jacobin, unitary, and centralist culture of the state. This can be observed, for instance, in the lower proportion of public spending allocated to territorial administration than in the European average. Republic is present as one and indivisible, and laws are applied uniformly through the territories. Furthermore, the guarantor of general interest is considered to be the states. We then understand why integration is understood as a state juridical procedure. Denmark is also a unitary country, but relies on a principle of coordination of its territories. In this small country, for practical and historical libertarian reasons, a large proportion of social spending is then allocated to locality. But there is simultaneously a great deal of coordination between these levels. This country tried then to reconcile centralist states and localist logic of governance. Spain is highly decentralized, with historical nationality recognized and significant symbolic and material distinction according to region. The Basque autonomous community, for instance, collect taxes which is redistributed to the states. Additionally, there are in the Basque country an ongoing struggle for independence that generates a strong local identity and solidarity between members. In this context, public actors and associations are imagining integration in the Basque country and not in Spain. On the one hand, this increases collaboration and discussion at the local level and stimulates pragmatic logic of integration. Moreover, this encourages a desire to distinguish oneself from the Spanish state by implement more inclusive way of thinking integration of foreigners in order to stimulate national building process with migration at the local level. The effect of decentralization can also be observed in the sense of attachment explained by Danes and French toward the country of state. This is significantly higher than the Spanish feeling at national attachment. Conversely, Spaniards have a stronger attachment to the region than in the two other countries. This phenomenon may provide some insight into why Spaniards seem to adopt more welcoming measures. Indeed, scientific literature has repeatedly demonstrated that when integration is considered from a more local perspective, this encourages pragmatic approaches that are more welcoming and less ideological than if they are considered at the state or national scale. In a country with a state-centered and centralist culture such as France, it seems that the ideal and the civic territorial logic of citizenship take precedence. It is therefore understandable that the association focused their activity more than elsewhere on the legal dimension of integration in order to guarantee equality before the states. In a country where mixed governance combined with an ethno-cultural model of citizenship finally applied at local level, as in Denmark, it is understandable that the associative approach are marked by nationalist approach and the preservation of cultural tradition, even at the local level. I have like 10 minutes. I can see the chat, perhaps. Okay. So there is another element that is really important to understand the voice and the social position of association, but also the relationship with public authority. Is the configuration of social protection system. In Denmark, and all that also strongly depend on the role played by the states. So I will not be very long here, but I will give you some elements. In Denmark, for example, the social protection system is really based on the universalist model where public authority provide most of the education, health, and social service. Of course, there is in this country a lot of voluntary work, but when we see in the detail, we can see that mainly of this voluntary work concern leisure and culture. And the state is really the responsible for social issue and poverty, among other things. In France, the situation is more diverse. We have a strong welfare state, but the state is also really based on a large proportion of association involved in social action and access to rights. In this situation, associations have at the same time a role of contestation, but also a role of attestation of state's policies. The Spanish welfare state is much more recent than in the other country. In this context, the states have had to rely heavily on existing network and of association and religious organization to develop its social function. In this context, associations have are really considerable legitimacy to say what is important to implement in the social action field. This configuration of social protection system also had a major influence on the vision of individual and its relationship with society as a whole, and therefore on social attachment. The importance of the individual in Denmark, for example, with a universalist model, the importance of family and the individual in France with this cooperative model, and the importance more of the community-based solidarity in Spain. Finally, all these factors also have an impact directly on the way we perceive the threat posed by foreigners in our society and the manner we had to integrate them inside the society. I will not going in the detail, but here we can, for example, see like individual person of country main problem is in Denmark is really immigration. As we can see here, immigration and the protection of social system is the two things like for Danish are the most important. And in France, in a more cooperative level, this question of protection of social system do not really appear. But immigration is appear to also to the main problem of the city, but with unemployment. It's the same thing in Spain. In Spain, where employment is really the first problem, perceived problem of the country, but immigration is not. Bon. I will continue also quickly here in order to give you the discussion. And so a last factor that really that I show in my thesis really important is like the political culture and the consensual or conflictual nature of society that have an important effect on the degrees of civic and political engagement of citizens, in the level of trust in the government and its policies, but also in the way in which civil society organizations react to state policies, and also the legitimacy accorded to the state in defining social order. And these elements play an important role on the political place and the political work of association in the field of integration. So quickly, France is a society, it's a conflict-based political culture. We have an important tradition of struggling in trade unionism, but there is also a lot of conflict that shape French culture, notably between Catholic culture and secularism, and so on. Spanish also have an important conflictual political culture, with an imaginary of a fratricidal civil war, 40 years of dictatorship, and also a tradition of struggling trade unionism. And in the specific case of Basque Country, it was one of the most important European armed conflicts for independence in Basque Country, with the will to make Basque Country independent from Spain. Conversely, Denmark is based on the more consensus-based political culture and comprehensive democracy. And for example, the Social Democratic Party, since the 19th century, tried to not to oppose, for example, the worker with the employers, but more to speaking about all the people of Denmark. So in this country, this consensus base, we can really see it because, like, for example, in the relationship between association and public authority in the field of integration, we cannot see, as I told you before, like a really need to oppose to the states. Member of association much more see the role as complementary with the states, and so there is not this socio-political dimension of associative activity. In contrast, I saw that in Bilbao, the political work was every time association implement a political work and trying to change the perception of people, but also to oppose to the state vision. But at the same time, they work as partner with the public authority. As I explained that, it will mainly due to the decentralization that favorize the work between different actors at the local level. In Bordeaux, the situation was a bit more divided. It was not like the association were were partner and opposed to the states, or like in Denmark that were partner with the state. But in France, we can see in the field of association like a clear divide between apolitical association working in partnership with the states and thinking that is the best way to help foreigner, and association that are more involved in a conflictual relationship and willing resistance, willing a social transformation. So there is a pole of attestation and a pole of contestation that is much more divided than in the two other countries. So sorry, I'm going a bit quickly for that. But like, but going back just for the Denmark, I like the last citation because like is to exemplify this idea that Denmark is really consensual. You know, like they say, Denmark is special. We are at the beginning of a revolution in the 18th century, but it started raining, so people went home. You know, so it's like there is no this tradition of protest, etc. And you know that in France, the revolution was really violent, and this idea of conflict was traversing all the different centuries, for example. So in order to conclude, so I can say that for me it was really important to go beyond state and policy analysis, and in order to put in the analysis the role and the work of non-state actors in order to understand integration modalities in this free country. So with this entrance by associative actor, I could explore nuances and extension brought to integration context, modality, and dynamic. And that's not only lead to immigration policies or state discourses. Of course, state thinking structure the manufacture of integration norm, notably by citing part of the stake in struggle and their historical legitimacy over integration, among other things. And we know that state with education and so on is a central instance of socialization for citizens. So that have an important role in shaping the modality integration legitimate by this free society. But concretely, societal logic, we can say that is more a societal logic that animates the practice and the imagination of actors. And these societal logic are not only determined by states, they are more like an articulation between local, national, international. I do not speak about European level, but that have also an important influence through the financial of the city, but also in an associative network, etc. So So for me, in order to understand the way of thinking integration in European society, is important to take in account these different factors and to trying to articulate them in order to understand the way in which people are thinking and implement integration modality. So all that have effects and structure of, as I tell you, the imagination, but also this configuration participate to some relationship between different actors implement in the determination of integration.